Hi there, I'm Don Ross, and welcome to the very first episode of Guitar Case, the new podcast about everything and anything to do with the world's most popular instrument, the guitar. I started playing guitar at the age of 8, and it was a fertile time musically. I loved all sorts of music that I could get my hands on and my ears in front of. One instrument tended to tie most of it together, whether it was funk or R&B or folk music or jazz or rock. The guitar was and continues to be everywhere. So if you like the guitar and guitar music, you've come to the right place. My plan is to interview people who have had close associations with the instrument over the years. Players, guitar builders, composers, people who run record companies, the whole gamut. First up on Guitar Case is a series of 3 episodes featuring an in-depth interview that I did with the founder of CandyRat Records, Mr. Rob Poland. As you'll hear, Rob and I first met in the early 2000s and decided to team up on the idea of releasing an album on an internet-based record label in the post-Napster era. I spoke with Rob in September 2019 while we were both attending the inaugural Fingerstyle Collective Guitar Festival, an event sponsored by CandyRat and Fret Monkey. Fret Monkey is an international artist collective that was formed recently and has started to work collaboratively with CandyRat to further the cause of guitar music in the 21st century. I'll be speaking to one of Fret Monkey's founders in future episodes. Rob and I sat in the dining room of a guest house that we were sharing during the event. I've done my best to equalize out some of the background hum of the air conditioning. It was 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and we were doing our best to stay cool. In this first installment, Rob Poland and I chat about the beginnings of the CandyRat label and what inspired Rob to decide to release my first CD after parting ways with the last of the old school record labels I was signed to. That recording, with the silly title Music for Vacuuming, ended up being the first release on the new label. And since then, CandyRat Records has helped launch the careers of other great musicians, including Antoine Dufour, Andy McKee, and a host of others. Here's the first part of my chat with Rob Poland. So welcome, Rob.
Thank you. Thanks, Don. Good to see you.
Thanks for being on Guitar Case. So, of course, I'm thinking back to when I first met you, which was, I think, in 2003 or something like that. You and your wife were on holiday in Nova Scotia, and I happened to be touring in Nova Scotia at the time, and I was living in Toronto back then. And so I saw you and Holly at least a couple of the shows that I did, including one at this very weird little theater in Lunenburg. I remember that. the Kippawo Arts Center of happy memory. And you introduced yourselves as being from Milwaukee, and you were on holiday in Nova Scotia, and you were big fans, and I was really happy that you'd taken time out of your vacation to come to the shows. And then, seems to me, not long thereafter, you were really interested in having me come and do some shows in the Midwestern states. So I remember getting an invitation from you, and I think you promoted shows in, what was it? It was Minneapolis, Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Louis.
Well, the first three. I think we did 3 shows, right?
Mm-hmm. Maybe St. Louis wasn't in there.
Yeah, Chicago, Milwaukee, and then we finished with Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The story of CandyRat is I guess kind of an interesting story. I was in a family business that had done pretty well for a few years, and I think it was early 2000s, and that business started to struggle. So I started to look for other things that I might do after this business, and I believe in 2002. The iPod came out, or maybe it came out a year or two earlier, but iTunes came out around that time. And so digital music kind of was born in early 2000s. And I was just checking out iTunes, and I was always a guitar geek. I grew up, when I fell in love with music, it was Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin. And specifically Hendrix, and the sounds he was getting from his guitar, I felt was like taking not only his inner emotions, but some sort of, energy from, the universe, and it would come in through him, and Hendrix could actually channel it through his instrument.
Exactly.
So it wasn't necessarily the notes, I just felt like it was emotion and energy coming out through his music.
Mm-hmm.
And I was blown away and deeply moved by it. So I picked up the guitar in high school, and I got really serious about it and considered maybe being an artist and a musician for a career, and played a lot of guitar in high school.
Cool.
And my senior year in high school, I had like music theory period 1, and I think it was orchestra in period 2. And my father had taken a job. We were in Milwaukee. We were in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, just north of there. I went to high school, and my father had taken a job in California, and so my parents decided rather than sell the house, and move me my senior year in high school, they were gonna try to ride it out for a year where he would just have an apartment, and then they were gonna sell the house after I graduated high school.
That's pretty considerate. Yeah, my parents did something similar for me.
Yeah, it was super cool looking back at it. But the nice thing about that, being a senior in high school, was my dad left his automobile at home, and I was able to drive that to school each day.
Right.
And so I was always a late sleeper and struggled to get up in the morning. And so I didn't make it to music theory more than once or twice.
Dang.
I failed. So anyway, the reason I'm bringing that up is because what happened was I applied to Berkeley.
Oh yeah.
And did not get accepted.
I see.
And my mom, being my mom, called up to try to just get some clarification as to why I wasn't accepted. And they said, well, he had one music theory course in high school and he got a big fat F. Oops. So probably this is not for him. So anyway, I had kind of well, what should I do? Because that was my plan A. Plan B was I don't know what to do. And I thought about it, and I knew I wanted a family. I knew I wanted kids. I thought, just knowing myself, that maybe if I was successful in music, I would be on the road a lot. And I didn't know what that would be for family life for me personally.
It's not easy.
It's not easy. And I thought also, knowing myself, that eventually that I might self-destruct if I was like lonely on the road. And if that was kind of the success, if that's what success was, then maybe music wasn't for me. Maybe I should just enjoy it rather and not choose as a profession.
Be an audience.
Right. Just be a fan. Just enjoy it. And so I did a 360 and applied to a state school in Wisconsin, and went into computer science, business, and economics.
That's more of a 180, but who's counting?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, that's right. 360. Okay.
It's okay.
It's somewhat early in the morning. I'm still kind of waking up.
That's all right. But I think maybe trigonometry or something was right after music theory.
That's probably, yeah. My math skills aren't the greatest. Anyway, so it was weird, because if you've ever had a dream and then and it's really strong, and then you totally shift away from it, it's kind of like
it's rough.
It's rough. A part of you have to almost bury and then start and then grow something new. Yeah. So anyway, I sold my electric guitars in college, for cash.
Yep.
Because you need cash in college as a college student. And I didn't really pay much attention to music because I was so focused on career, college, and then later I got married in college, and then we had our first child before we graduated. So it was a lot of motivation, like get out and find a job and start earning money to support the family. Sure. So like music, and I went to college 89 through 93, I think. 93. And in the 90s, I lost track of guitar. I was a super guitar geek in high school. And in the 90s, I was kind of like, actually I was more into like rap and hip hop and the whole like NWA and Dr. Dre. And so that the beats, there's just the beats. I love that stuff as well.
Not a lot of guitar riffing going on.
Not a lot of guitar riffing
sure.
in the hip hop scene, rap scene, the gangster rap scene. I guess it would have been back in that. So anyway, I got out, did this family business. It did well for a while, and then I was looking for something else to do. Got on iTunes and started looking, for Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and other guitar stuff. And the cool thing about iTunes was, once you found something you liked, it it had algorithms to kind of show you other things similar to it.
Exactly.
And in one of these like deep dives in the afternoon, I stumbled upon I guess acoustic fingerstyle guitar.
Right.
And to me, what that meant was like, previous to finding it on iTunes was like, really my dad's guitar was like, John Denver kind of did some finger picking. My dad did some finger picking, and it was like a folky thing to me,
right.
and never of interest. And then I found this music on iTunes, and it was super groovy on the acoustic guitar, and I was blown away. I was like, what is this? I've never heard anything like this.
Right. So you'd sort of never really exposed yourself to like the goings on in the 80s and 90s.
I had no idea. It was all electric, all on the electric guitar side. Sure. I had no idea the acoustic guitar
So
guitar
Michael
side.
Hedges wasn't on your radar.
I had no idea who Michael Hedges was.
Right. Okay.
So I found your music on iTunes. Somehow I got there, and it was either like Klimbim or Michael.
Sure.
I was just absolutely blown away. I was
Nice.
like, what is this? I mean, is this one person doing that? Like at the same time, it literally sounded like 3 or 4 parts.
Wow, that's cool.
And then there was all this percussive stuff, like it sounded like somebody was banging harmonics. I mean, I knew what harmonics were. It sounded like somebody was banging on the body and on the neck, and it was just, what is this? And I thought it was really innovative for the instrument. I considered myself knowledgeable enough about the guitar that I was shocked that I didn't know about it.
Gotcha.
So I started to spend a lot of time like, I really like this. What else is out there? And I found the next person I found was Billy McLaughlin.
Oh yeah, of course.
Finger dance, and he was doing like 2-hand tapping, and there was like some nice reverb and chorus, and it was a little bit more chill.
And at that time, Billy and I were on the same label. We were both recording for Narada,
right?
Also out of Milwaukee,
right?
But Narada of happy memory.
yeah, and that was cool. So there I got right away that there's this new style that I had no idea what it was. I heard 2 different players. They sounded quite different, but quite innovative on both sides. The third person I found was Hedges. So I did find Hedges early on, and I thought that was amazing as well. But it didn't have, I would say, like the groovy. I don't know. I think you get a lot of. I don't know. You said, knowing you that you and heard your story, so you got it in from like R&B and Motown and funk, and I guess rap took a lot of that, because to me what I heard in your music was, I heard my 90s kind of love of bass and kind of beats and that sort of thing.
Well, sure.
And
of course in the 90s I had a stepson who was listening to a lot of our modern R&B and rap and hip hop, so I was in touch with it. I wasn't listening to it on my spare time, but I was hearing it in the background a lot, and so I was sort of attuned to the fact that that there's still a strong sense of groove in a lot of modern music, and thank goodness for that, because I came out of a very, very kind of James Brown, Tower of Power, Stevie Wonder kind of world. I loved that stuff when I was a kid, so that's really informed a lot of the groovier stuff that I've written. So that's really cool that you saw the links as well. Cool.
Yeah, I definitely I felt them and heard them, and was drawn to it. And all this happened in a couple days on iTunes. The next thing I did was, because I was just enamored with it, I got on the internet and I looked you up, and I said, "Oh my gosh, this isn't something that happened 20 years ago. This is happening now."
Right.
And this artist is current, and he's touring. And to me, Don sounded like, Don had the same impact that Jimi Hendrix had on me.
Wow, that's really an honor.
Yeah, and I was born after Hendrix had passed away, so I never had the chance to see him perform. And so I knew kind of like right then and there that I was going to make a huge effort to go see you.
Cool.
And I found your website. I looked at your dates over the next, the rest of the year. It was maybe like halfway through the year. And you had tour dates in Canada, and you had lots of tour dates in Europe and Germany. And being from, Milwaukee, I said, okay, it has to be a Canadian date. I'm not going to go,
Sure.
It's just closer. And so I told Holly, my wife and now business partner, we got to go see this guy.
Nice.
So we made plans. The reason I chose Halifax was because I was like deathly afraid of like flying to Toronto and like missing your one concert.
I see.
And then like the whole trip, because that was the trip.
Wow.
So I chose Halifax, or excuse me, Nova Scotia, because you were playing 3 shows over the course of the weekend. So I thought if I missed one, I could go see the next one.
Awesome.
And so we booked our flights, and on our 10th wedding anniversary, I decided to take Holly to a beautiful vacation in Halifax, Nova Scotia,
Nice.
which was a beautiful vacation, and Halifax is a beautiful city.
Yeah, it's a nice town.
Yeah, I would recommend it to anyone who's not been. You know, probably not in the winter time, but spring, summer, and fall would be great. So anyway, we get to Halifax. It's fairly small. It was kind of smaller than I expected to be like a major Canadian city. It's actually a fairly small city.
Well, the interesting thing about Halifax, of course, it's very old. It's for a European settled city. It's one of the oldest cities in North America, and you know the road system until quite recently, you could tell that it was mostly like pony trails. But back in the day, because you'd have these 5 roads that would all meet in one spot, and the traffic light system was crazy. So they've put in all these roundabouts to sort of battle that problem. But yeah, it's got this sense of history to it, European history, and then of course my mother's side of the family is First Nation, you know, Native American, whatever you want to call them. People from that area. So I eventually moved there. Of course, my wife and I moved there in 2009 and moved away for a little while, but then moved back. And so for me, it feels really familiar, just ancestrally. Plus, we used to go there for holidays when I was a kid. So I love the city. The city itself is built on a peninsula, and it's only about 250,000 people. But if you take the whole region, it's about 500,000 people. So it is the biggest city east of Montreal in Canada, but it's still quite small. Yeah.
So we get in, and I think the first concert, we probably get in Thursday or something. Your first concert's on a Friday night. It's probably Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I think it's Luxembourg or something like that.
Lunenburg, yeah.
Lunenburg.
It's a little fishing village south of Halifax.
Yeah, and there's like a sailing history.
That's right.
A lot. We went down there and did some sightseeing before the concert, just to make scope it out, just so we wouldn't miss it.
Sure.
And we find the venue. The venue is like it's like an old theater, churchy building or something in a very small town, really small town. I mean, there's probably 2,000 people.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't know what to expect. And at this point, again, I wasn't sure what you were doing. I mean, I knew a lot of guitar techniques on the electric guitar, but I knew nothing about fingerstyle. So it wouldn't have surprised me. It would have been disappointing if you came out and played and I saw like 2 other guitarists behind you or something. But, I had no idea. But I thought maybe, like is this all going on? Because it sounds like one guitar. I could hear like I couldn't hear 3 instruments.
Right.
It sounded like it was all on one guitar, and like as you do, percussion and everything, like I could hear stuff stops. It would stop ringing. So I'm like, I think this is one instrument. So anyway, I get there and to the concert, and it's a small venue. It's very charming. There's 40, 50 people there. Very small audience.
I remember
for the size of the town, it was a good audience, but. I was like, okay, what's this? And then your manager, Del Vizo, was opening.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. He opened those shows.
He opened those shows on that tour. And your former manager, I guess.
Yeah.
And so he's sitting down. Del plays seated. And his playing is totally different. Style is totally different from Don's. Although they're both, I guess, fingerstyle as far as a technique. And Del's doing his thing, and I'm thinking, okay, that's kind of cool, and yeah, I get it. But I hadn't heard any of that stuff on iTunes, so I wasn't familiar with any of the music.
Sure.
So it didn't really, I'm waiting to see you come out, and I think you started with Drac and Friends Part 1. And one of the things that, on electric guitar is real common is the whammy bar, right?
Right.
The pitch bend down, pitch bend up. And I was always kind of curious because I'm like, he's hitting like all these harmonics, and it sounds like he's using an acoustic whammy bar.
Right.
So like, does this guy actually have a whammy bar on his acoustic guitar? I mean, this is what's going on in my head. So Don comes out. He's Don's a big guy. He's like 6'4", he's a presence, and his guitar is huge, and it's just a normal looking acoustic guitar, but it's a very large one, and he's playing this song, and I'm like, oh my God, he is playing. There's no guitars behind him, and he's playing everything himself, and he hits those harmonics, and he like reaches over at the top of his neck, like Hendrix would, and he just does this like 360, like he's like bending the neck, and the pitches are like coming way down, and I'm like, it's like
please don't break.
Yeah, I was so blown away. I was absolutely blown away. And then my next thought was, like, the audience is pretty chill here. Like, I'm just like,
right,
unbelievably blown away. And I'm like, why is there only 40 people here? Why are they pretty subdued? Like, what is going on here? I'm
Small
like,
town Nova Scotia.
Do people not know what's going on here? Like the innovation for on the instrument, and I mean, I guess the history for fingerstyle is much longer. So it's probably when you actually go back and look at the history, there is this progression of innovation that's gone on for maybe 100 years, or I don't know, certainly 50 years, and there's been periods of probably rapid innovation. So what I was left with was it was amazing music. I've never heard anything like it. It was one person playing all these guitar parts. It was the bass line. It was the drum parts. It was harmonics. It was melodies, and then harmonies on those melodies. It was rhythm. I mean, it was just everything. It was the whole band, right?
Cool.
And I was absolutely blown away. So. At the end of the show, pretty much starstruck. It was like a fan. Just Don's out greeting everybody as they go, as they leave, and by the merch section. And I just said hi. I'm Rob from Milwaukee. I'm a big fan. This is amazing.
I was so impressed that you guys were there for. I mean, Halifax is so far east, and then Milwaukee's right in the middle of North America. And it just sort of seemed like, wow, that's a long way to come. And they came to a show, and that's awesome. I was really pleased, really flattered.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was worth every penny, and more. So it was really one of the most amazing experiences of my life. That first concert in Nova Scotia.
Oh, what an honor! Thank you.
I was just blown away. So anyway, we shook hands, and I introduced myself to your manager at the time, Del Vizzo, and said, told him I'd probably be there tomorrow night, and went on our way. And we went to go see the next two shows, and again, it was I think I don't know if you did this on purpose, but the set list changed each night. I was able to see new songs each night, and it was 3 amazing concerts. And the overall experience of being up there with Holly, and it was Canada the first time, and it was an amazing experience.
I've always had a policy for my solo shows of not using set lists. It's not really. It's not like I'm trying to be hard on myself or make rules that I'm never going to break or whatever. I just like the spontaneity of not having a set list. And when I have a new record out, obviously I'm thinking, okay, well, I got to make sure I play some stuff off the new record, and so I highlight it. But then I can just decide at the last minute, I feel like playing blah blah. Or if somebody yells out, play, I can just well, sure, why not? I've actually done shows where. Like I do an annual show in Toronto between Christmas and New Year's, and sometimes I tell people ahead of time on Facebook, okay, it's going to be an all request show. And what that does to me is that, of course, there are some people who really like a tune I haven't played in 15 years, and I'll say, okay, give me a second, and I'll get into the tuning, and I might just quickly woodshed, turn the volume down, and okay, here we go, get ready for it. It might be terrible, but people love it. They just think it's great. So. Definitely I let a lot of spontaneous things happen, so that's good that you went to 3 shows and you get 3 different set lists.
Yeah, I remember right before these concerts you would put out the record Robot Monster. And so you were playing Robot Monster at pretty much every show, which was amazing.
It's a crazy tune.
Yeah, but it was like Andy and Martin was on. Martin was on that record, and Drac and Friends Part 1.
Actually, Andy Martin was on Passion Session, but that would have been just a couple of years before that.
Okay, but it was pretty much the concerts were Passion Session and Robot Monster kind of combined, and those are just two amazing records.
Thanks.
Yeah, so over the course of that weekend, I spoke with your manager, Del, and had mentioned that, maybe we could do 2 or 3 concerts over the course of a weekend in Milwaukee, around my area. And so I stayed in touch with Del, and he thought that would be a great idea. So anyway, I stayed in touch with Del. It was probably a year later, though. I'm not quite sure why that much time passed. But... Or maybe I was in touch and it just took a year to organize or something. I think
the shows in Nova Scotia were probably like the beginning of the fall, I think. Am I correct? I think
that makes sense.
September, October sometime. And I think the shows you did were like the following late spring or something like that.
Okay, that makes sense. Because you can tours and seasons.
Yeah.
So anyway, I had an agreement with your manager to put on these 3 shows. It was Chicago, Milwaukee, and Minneapolis. Had no idea how to promote shows. Had no idea how to book theaters. I mean, I'd never been in the music business at the time. The family business was in private post-secondary education.
Right.
And we had 30 centers around the country, and it was totally different business.
Of course.
But the similarities was every business you need marketing and advertising, and technology was very important back then to any business. So I figured I could take my technology skills and my advertising and marketing skills, apply them to these concerts. I figured renting venues would be relatively easy. So I did rent 3 venues. I rented a theater in Chicago, a music venue in Milwaukee, Shank-Hall. The theater in Chicago, I can't even remember the name, but it was just a private theater.
That's right. Yeah, I think it was like after their live theater show or something. I went up because I remember the set was still set up on the stage.
And you could see on this theater like that. Normally, what they would do is like musicals and plays, and there was kind of like trees, like big trees in the background. There was like some stage set of some musical.
They obviously read my contract rider. Well, it's interesting, if you don't mind me interjecting, my perspective on that. I remember you and I talking a lot via email and stuff like that about these shows. And so I was looking forward to it because my career's been a funny one. It's like being based in Canada early on. I put out a bunch of records for like an independent label first, and then eventually on the Canadian version of Sony. But the records never got released outside of Canada. It was very frustrating for me. And so it led to me relying on Canada mostly as my touring base. And then I started getting invitations to go play in Europe. So I started playing a lot in Europe, even though I didn't have record distribution over there. And so then, ironically, I had this US label eventually take interest in me. And I did the Passion Session record and another album called Huron Street and another album called Robot Monster for Narada, this label that no longer exists. And they were like, please play more in the States. And I would say, well, yeah, I'd love to. But, it's hard. You basically have to get invited by somebody, because I wasn't going to go sit and try to eke out a tour. Because touring in the States is a whole different kettle of fish than touring in Canada or Europe. In Europe, they take a lot of care of artists. If you have a good agent who gets you good gigs, okay, they also get you a hotel room, they get you dinner, and they make sure that all your expenses are covered while you're there and stuff like that. You might not make a king's ransom on the door, but still, you don't have huge expenses. You just have to get yourself over to Europe and rent a car and all that stuff that you have to do. So there are expenses, but not directly from the gig. And in Canada, it's sort of like that for most gigs, and every once in a while there's a little bit more, you have to do more for yourself, but still, for the most part, you're relatively taken well care of. But my experience before that in the States, by and large, is if I just went ahead and booked a bunch of stuff myself, it was very much an every man for himself situation, right? So they more or less unlock the door for me to go in and play. But
that sounds like today.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. It hasn't changed. And the UK is like that too, so that they're tough nuts to crack, because in the UK, for sure, especially in this world that I occupy, this sort of rarefied guitar world, if you have a massive hit on YouTube, then people do show up. Otherwise, it's really hard to get bums in seats. And it's a little easier to get bums and seats in the States overall, but you might not get treated very well. Like you have to be prepared to really take care of yourself a lot. So what I've done in the States mostly is I've just relied on invitations like the one you gave me, where it's set out, look, you don't have to worry about anything, it's all good. So I've been doing in the States, I've mostly worked that way. So what was attractive about what you did was that you said, I'll guarantee you a fee, I'll drive you around, you can stay at my place in Milwaukee, we'll get inexpensive hotel rooms, but it'll be comfortable enough, and blah blah blah. So I felt like you had taken care of things, and when I showed up, it was very much that you were the host and I was the guest, and I felt like I really did feel welcome, and I felt very, and that's a rare thing. So what I remember, and this is the interesting aside, the label that I had been with, Narada, which was also based ironically in Milwaukee, where you were, they had been in panic mode for a couple of years because of Napster. And it was funny because to me it was like there was a certain amount, and I'm sorry, maybe some people that used to work at Narada will hear this one day, but it really felt like they didn't get what was going on. They really didn't understand why the bottom was falling out of their business model. And so when I signed with them to do the Passion Session record, it was before Napster. Things were very rosy. They were used to selling at least 50,000 copies of each record. Billy McLaughlin had won a Grammy Award for them and all that kind of stuff. And so they were doing quite well. And when I visited the office in 1998 or whatever it was, they seemed very well appointed, and they took me out for a nice lunch, and I got driven around in a convertible. It was fun. And so I thought, okay, well, this looks like a good career move. And I did the Passion Session record. That got released around the world. It was great. I had an international release, and I was getting fan mail from Japan and Poland and Mexico and all this kind of stuff. And Amazon.com was selling it and was doing okay. And I thought, well, this is awesome. This is really rocking. And within months, Napster happened. So I sort of felt like after 10 years in the business, I had spent 10 years climbing the mountain. I finally got to the peak and then fell down the other side.
Perfect timing.
Yeah. And of course, for me, it was a really challenging time in a lot of ways because right after Passion Session came out, my late wife, Kelly, found out she had breast cancer. So it was like all these sunny things were happening. And then all at once, my wife got sick and Napster happened. And then everybody was like, oh, what are we going to do? And I was kind of panicking in a lot of different ways about my wife's life and my career and everything else, and I had small children to worry about, and so it was a crazy time. But by the time I met you a few years later, and Kelly had passed away by then, sadly, by the time I met you, Narada was scrambling so badly, they just had no idea what to do. And sorry, go ahead.
My memory of, we stopped by the
Yes.
Narada offices when we got to Milwaukee to pick up some CDs.
That's right.
And my impression of that was, wow, this is a nice facility, a nice business, lots of offices, windows and everything. But it looked like, when you see those movies and, it's like this, like those accounting firms that are running some sort of scam, and they're like, the IRS is coming, shred everything. And you see people running around an office, it felt like there was death or something in the air.
Well, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Just before that, I had, out of the blue, I remember this tour was already booked. Out of the blue, I got this conference call from them. They hadn't warned me they were calling. And so I pick up my phone, and there's 6 people on the other side of the line. And they sort of take turns pointing out that I don't tour in the U.S. enough. Or that I don't tour enough. That was it. No, you're not touring enough. And I said, guys, listen, I'm a single father. I have these 2 little girls at home. And I'm on the road 6 months a year. And right now, that year I was taking them with me a lot, because I homeschooled them for a year just so that they'd have a parent all the time because their mom was gone. So I tried to educate them that, that this has less to do with me not touring and more to do with the reality. And then they said, well, it seems like all of our artists are not really doing what they have done in the past as far as touring, and our sales are tanking. I said, guys, have you ever heard of the internet? I said, don't you realize what's going on? Napster is killing the music business. People are stealing music. They're not paying for it anymore. It's hard to compete with free, if people figure out a way not to pay for things. This is what's happening to your record label. The artists are still working really hard. I'm working as hard as I dare work with, my situation. And so I was peeved. I was upset with them. And then, eventually this tour was coming up. So I spoke to my product manager and I said, well, I need to pick up a couple of boxes of CDs. And he said, okay, I don't know if I'll still be here when you get here. And I was like, holy moly. And he says, yeah, we're kind of shutting down. Basically, we're moving what's left of the label to Manhattan. It's going to just get folded into a bunch of other labels that Virgin. I remember Virgin, yeah. So Virgin owned the label I was with, and of course then I guess EMI owned Virgin. I mean, all these things that have happened since then, EMI no longer exists. They got bought up by Universal. All these things, incredible things were happening. And then you and I pull up, to this lovely, business building. And I'd been there before, of course. And we walk in, and it's just like it looked like those clips of Bear Stearns during the financial crisis. All these people running out with boxes of stuff, and it was like they had to get the hell out because they were done. They were really done. And my boxes of CDs were just sitting there on the floor with like no furniture in the room. Just like I signed away. Well, thanks guys, and that was the end of our relationship. So it's funny. Here's kind of the Jobs and Wozniak moment for me about the label was that you and I were driving down some long stretch of interstate between gigs. And I said, isn't that wild? Yeah, I have no more record label and no more contract, and there they are, they're gone. And actually, inside, of course, I was actually really happy in a way, because it felt like the last vestiges of an impossible situation had sort of been remedied by the fact that, for 2 or 3 years up to that point beforehand, I was thinking like, I've got to get out of this record deal. This is just, it's a disaster. I'm never nothing's going to become of this. And so I thought wouldn't it be nice to be an independent artist? Mm-hmm. And then you and I are driving down the road, and I'm sort of telling you some of this, and then you sort of surprised me when you said, well, would you consider doing something, sort of internet based, maybe together? Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, what a cool idea. So I don't know what your recollection of that is, but it'd be cool to hear your story.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, the family business that we started that had done really well I won't go into that story because it's a long story. It started to struggle as well for different reasons. But we were fortunate enough to sell some of our stock to one of the investors. Mm-hmm. The investors owned, once they owned 51%,
right.
I became, our family, my dad and I became employees. And that was the beginning of the end. And I knew it. And I was looking for the next thing to do. In that business, I ran the marketing and advertising for a couple of years. I had a technology background. Internet music was exploding. This was the early days of iTunes and iPods, and a year or two later, iPhones. And I thought, you know what, that makes sense. I see that model. It's digital music, $10 for a digital record. You own it or whatever, and you can take it anywhere you want. You can play it at home. That makes sense to me. I thought the music was great. I thought this fingerstyle thing and what Don was specifically doing it was so new and innovative that I was sure that there would be a huge demand for this, or at least a much larger demand than what I was seeing at the time.
Right.
So I thought, no problem. We could sell 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 records. Mm-hmm. So if you think of Narada, they had a business model where they, before the Napster, they were doing 50,000. In my mind, I thought if I could sell 2,000 or 3,000 records, mm-hmm. A year, I could make that work. Mm-hmm. I could make that work. It just made sense to me while we were driving. And so you had said that you didn't have a label, and I thought, well, not only do I think I could help, like maybe get Don's music out to a larger crowd, but I think I could actually get this style out to a bigger crowd. Mm-hmm. And I floated the idea, and I don't know if I feel like we agree like a handshake. Here's what what I'll bring to the table, and
pretty much
your record, your next record. It's like a 1 record deal.
Well, what I remember too is that I thought, well, I think I can trust this guy, and maybe what I can do is I can suggest a few things to avoid. And one of the things that had always bothered me about all the record deals I had had before that, I'd had 3 record deals before that, was that there was always a publishing deal attached to it. Now, that sounds on the surface like an attractive option. Sometimes you think, oh, good, I'd have this publishing company trying to get my stuff placed in movies and TV and maybe used in advertising or whatever, and there'd be another income stream. But in reality, 90% of the time, that just never happens. You just end up being another artist whose music they end up controlling, and you're giving a large chunk, usually about 25% of all the money that comes in on publishing to them, whether they do anything for you or not. So I knew a lot of artists who had managed to sign record deals without having to sign publishing deals, and I thought, okay, I know it's possible. So you were asking for a few pointers, and I said, well, one thing that you'll really ingratiate yourself to artists with, if you do, is that you don't take any publishing. Just do records. Just put records out. That's what most artists need. They just need some sort of vehicle for releasing their music, and it's too much work for artists to be, for the most part, to be writing all the music, recording all the music, doing all the shows and everything, and then having on top of that to sell records. I think I used the line with you. I borrowed it from another artist at one point. He always said, I love everything about being a musician except the selling of records. I find it soul destroying. So, and I don't mind selling them off the stage after the show, of course, that's one thing, but having to be completely in touch or in charge of the marketing of a recording it's more than most artists really feel comfortable doing, and it's too much work. It ends up being the last little bit of free time you have gets taken up with just sitting in front of a computer all day. So I was really happy with the idea of you specifically taking over that side of things, and you obviously had some marketing chops and you knew technology, and so there were a lot of things that were attractive about it. So yeah, that's basically what I remember, is that the two of us, well, let's just try it. Let's try it one record.
It's not a huge risk on either side, right? And I do remember asking, like, well, what's a fair contract? What are fair terms? How do I not? I didn't want to become, because you hear as a consumer, artists are always getting screwed by the record labels. Obviously I didn't want to start a business where that is what I would be looked at.
Exactly.
So Don said, yeah, okay, so artists should own their own publishing. Artists should own their own masters. Our deals are 50-50 profit splits. I mean, they're pretty straightforward deals.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of advice from Don on the contract. What I ended up doing for the contract was I got online at the time. I don't know if Google was even around then. I think it might have been, but some search engine was. And I found a music contract, and I bought a standard music contract. I kind of modified it, sent it to Don, and said, "What do you think?" And Don said, "You know what? I feel like that's a fair contract."
And to me, it was a huge change. Like, this is something I've had to impress upon, especially younger musicians who didn't go through the old style record business. There were a lot of things I liked about the old style record business. I'm not one to diss it, because I made good relationships. By and large, the people I worked with were really decent human beings who were really passionate about music and who really cared and supported a lot. And so my experiences overall, especially even when I was with a big company like Sony, very positive. But the one thing that always bothered me was that these contracts that I would have to sign seemed like they were designed for me never ever to make more money than they would front me at first for an advance. So, I mean, the advances are nice to have, but they're, and when you're not doing straight ahead pop music, they're small and they're just meant to be, well, here's a little bit of royalty in advance so you can live on something until a record comes out.
While you're writing.
Yeah. So that's when I was, especially when I was signed to Sony, I finally started making advances that seemed more reasonable. like grown up money instead of silly, here's $1,000 or something. It was actually something decent. But of course that went against your royalty account, so the chances of ever recouping it were really hard, to even imagine.
Especially when you're making $1 a record. Or
But you see, that's the point. Is that what I try to impress on people was that my deal with these labels, usually, as an artist, I was making 8% of retail. Yeah, 8% of retail.
Okay. Oh.
And like the retail price, the suggested retail price would be whatever, $15.50 or something.
Right.
So I was making 8% on paper of that. And then as a producer, I was making another 2%. So the most I could ever hope to make was 10% of retail. So whenever somebody bought a CD, they didn't realize that maybe $1, maybe a little over $1, would potentially go into the artists and the producers' royalty account. Mm-hmm. Everything else was taken up by manufacturing, distribution, packaging, delivery, brick and mortar stores, all this kind of stuff.
Tour support, every expense
all that analog stuff that was going on for all those years. So in a way, I understood why my royalty was so low, but at the same time, I thought, man, there's a side to me even back in the 80s and 90s that thought I should just be getting these made myself and sell them off the stage. I'd probably make more money. Mm-hmm. But there was the sort of the other side of things where these record companies were actually, invest in doing some advertising to help your career, or tour support was a big one with Sony. Mm-hmm. and even with Narada as well. They did some tour support. So things like that would happen. So there were some upsides, but the contracts I signed gave away a lot. And so one of the things that aside from the no publishing thing with you, the profit split was so much more amenable to anything that I'd ever done before. Plus, my cost to buy records to sell off stage was so much lower than, this is something that's kind of amazing when I think about it. When I was signed to Sony, when my records were new, when they weren't considered catalog, so when the records were brand new, I was paying $12 and change Canadian per CD. And of course, there were taxes on top of that. So my first tour for my first record with Sony, that was in 1995. It's an album called This Dragon Won't Sleep. I ended up getting this opening slot on like a rock and roll tour because they thought it'd be cool to see this guy rock out for 3 songs at the beginning of the show. It's different from everything else. Awesome. And it was good for me that way, good promotion. And I sold lots of CDs because people would get knocked out by the 3 songs I would do or whatever. So do my 3 hottest tunes. But the records at the venues, these Canadian venues, were selling for $20 Canadian. And that $20, there was $3 would go to the promoter that was doing the tour, and $3 would go to the venue. That was the deal I was getting. So it was $14 left, and I was paying 13 and change for a CD. So I was making about 70 cents.
That's crazy.
On each of those sales of CDs.
You're walking backwards.
Yeah, so it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous in so many ways. And of course, there were other shows where I would make a better markup, and it was fine. But in terms of it being a money-making thing, absolutely not. And for those kinds of things, you just say, okay, well, this is me investing in the thing, and it's investing in my career. Mm-hmm. And then eventually those records would come down in price to about $8 when they be considered catalog, but it was really rough. It was hard to make money, really hard on sales.
Yeah, I think what we agreed, because obviously the record label, I think it's had to make something on those records as well. So we agreed to $5 a record. Mm-hmm. So instead of $12. $12. So I thought that, and that was another term that, we talked about. So
here's another little side story, which I may or may not edit out. But here's another side story. When Narada was dying, and they were really having a lot of problems after Napster.
They're selling on sale to you?
No, here's what would happen. They at one point when things were going really well before Napster, my cost per CD was something like $7 or $8 US. So to me, that was okay. It was a bit cheaper. It was all right. And then every once in a while, once a year, just before the end of the fiscal year, they'd put stuff on sale. And you could buy your own records for like $6.
They're trying to make their end of year numbers.
Yeah. So I could buy them for $6. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. $6. That's crazy. And then Napster happened. And then they were slowly raising the artist price on CDs to try to make up some of their lost revenue. And I thought, oh, that's a bit sneaky, isn't it? It's awful. I mean, I at first I was like being forgiving about it because I thought, well, what else are they going to do? They're really in trouble. And then eventually the cost got up to something like $10 or $11. And I wrote to them and I said, guys, why are you doing this on the backs of the artists? Why do you think that we can afford to give over?
We need to fix the problem.
Yeah.
Rather than they need to change their business model.
Yeah. So it just was bizarre to me. And then eventually, the cost of a CD got up to like $11 or $12. I was like, this is insane. This is crazy. And then, this is not a word of a lie, just out of curiosity, I went on Amazon.com or, on eBay. I went on eBay. That was it. I went on eBay just to see if people were reselling my records. And sure enough, I saw one of my releases on the label for sale for $6. And it said new, sealed, never opened. And I looked and the seller was Narada Store. Wow. And so my brain exploded. And I wrote a really angry letter to the head of legal affairs. And I said, what on earth are you doing selling my records for half what you're charging me for? And you're selling them in public. That's on crazy. eBay. And I can see this. And an hour later it was gone. So they took it, and I think they took everything off. Because finally one of the artists said, this is BS, Right. So it's kind of amazing what was going on. I mean, I had a good relationship with them until the bottom started to fall out. And then, the fact that they were trying to make it about the artists, that really bothered me. So that left me with a bitter taste. I was sad to see everything fall apart, but it was one of the reasons why I was much happier just working one-on-one with you with a whole different way of doing things. Anyway.
Yeah, so that was a great weekend, and we had those 3 shows. Some of the shows were a little light on attendance. Milwaukee and Minneapolis had some fairly good attendance. Mm-hmm. I thought, there was like 80, 90 people at each show. Chicago was a little light, but I figured I didn't know what I was doing as far as promotion. Mm-hmm.
It was an alternative venue.
Yeah. So, but I had a good time and formed this new relationship with Don, and I had my next business venture over the course of this weekend. So it was a pretty cool weekend. So now, in my mind, what I'm thinking is, okay, we had agreed on an advance because Don didn't have his next record ready, but he's going to start writing towards his next record. I said, well, how long do you think that's going to take? Probably a year. I think it was a year or something, or close to.
Could have been, yeah.
So, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to open the doors of this business 1 year from today. And I think it must have been the fall because we opened up in November of 2005.
Yeah, what I remember was that we kind of opened the floodgates right at the end of November, sort of try to get some Christmas sales in there. And I had been, writing and working on a new record, and fortunately I had my own little studio at home. And the last 2 records I did for Narada, I recorded in my own studio. So I was seasoned already at making records at home. And so that recording became the first CandyRat album. And I remember asking you, I said, do you mind if I call it music for vacuuming? Is that too stupid? Because, my Narada never would have said yes to that, Sony would have been okay with it. But I think Narada was just like, they were so conservative and niche markety, it would have been way over their heads. And you just said, no. The edgier, the better. And I went, all right, this guy, I can get along with this guy. And I said, I want to put a flying saucer on the cover. Oh, yeah, that's fine. Yes!
That's funny.
Yeah.
I had no idea. So I was really trusting, whatever. To me, it wasn't about any of that. It was about the music. Mm-hmm. And it was great music. And there's so much innovation going on in this process of what Don was doing with Fingerstyle. That's what I was selling, and the guitar is the most popular instrument in the world.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Times 10. It seems like, piano's a great instrument. It's probably a better instrument, but it's a much bigger instrument and harder to move around.
Yeah, they say that there's 7 guitars made for every one of everything else, so wherever that number comes from, I don't know. The joke that Dan Curry always told, one piano, 7 guitars, 1 flute, 7 guitars, 1 accordion, 3,000 guitars.
That's great.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed the inaugural episode of Guitar Case, featuring yours truly, Don Ross. And you can check out the Guitar Case website, which is donrossguitarcase.com. Once again, it's donrossguitarcase.com. You'll be able to find this and all future episodes there, as well as on iTunes and wherever else you get your podcasts. We look forward to seeing you again soon. All right. Coming up soon will be part 2 of this episode. Hope to get that up in the next week or so. Part 2 of this episode with Rob Poland of CandyRat Records. And we should be able to turn this one into a 3-parter. We had a good long chat. All right. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.